Hello, everyone. It's your host, Amanda Eke, and I have some amazing news. Starting this fall, The Poet Speaks is coming to your TV screens. Yes, that's right. After 8 amazing seasons as a podcast, The Poet Speaks with Amanda Eke is now a TV show, airing on the Archaeology Channel's new streaming service, Heritage. Everyone get ready for a visual feast of spoken word performances and deep dives into the minds of poets from all over the world. Now, something extraordinary is coming, and you won't want to miss a single moment. Stay tuned. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Poet Speaks podcast. Now, our next guest is a spoken word pioneer, having won the Nuyorican Poets Cafe Grand Slam. He was a featured poet at the 2022 Whitney Biennial and received the 2006 Writers for Writers Award from Poets and Writers. He's a teaching artist at the Kennedy Center for the Arts and is one of the inaugural recipients of the 2023 James Baldwin Fellowship from the Maison Baldwin, Paris, France. His work appears in over 30 anthologies, and he has shared the stage with Patti Smith, Allen Ginsberg, and through Howard Zinn's Portraits Projects, and NYU has performed with Stanley Tucci, Eisenberg, and Lupe Fiasco. Everybody, please welcome to the podcast, Regie Cabico. Regie, how are you?
I'm great. Hello, Amanda. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. No, and I got excited just reading your bio. I mean, that is amazing, the things you've done and where you came from and then where you're at now. So first and foremost, tell us, where are we speaking of to you from today? What beautiful part of this beautiful world?
Right. I'm coming to you live from Washington, D.C.
DC. So Regie, tell me, were you born and bred in DC, or are you a transplant as an adult? Tell me a little bit about your background. Where did you grow up?
Yeah, well, I'm the child of Filipino immigrants born in Baltimore, Maryland, and my family, moved to Southern Maryland. So, 20 minutes outside of DC, actually where I grew up in Clinton, Maryland, is where after John Wilkes Booth assassinated Abraham Lincoln, he hid in a tavern in my little hometown of Clinton, Maryland. So there are lots of ghosts, cornfields, tobacco, very redneck, um, and African American, and then just the beginning of Filipinos, that were in Clinton, Maryland. So I did not grow up with a lot of Filipino representation growing up. And so I think as a poet, I think that really informed my writing because I wanted to really talk about being the child of immigrants and the Filipino American experience. So some of that's in my poetry.
Absolutely. Tell me a bit about that idea. The immigrant story is something that's it hits home for a lot of people, right? And I think even as someone, I'm a child of immigrants too. I think to even be in the field of whether it be the arts, writing, media, that's usually not the first thing maybe your parents
Right.
had an idea for you to grow up, and this is how you be, and this is what you choose as a living, right? Tell me a
Mhm.
bit about, how was your family very supportive of your career as a poet, as a writer?
It wasn't as a writer, it was really as a performer. I was reciting stories when I was 3 years old. I would memorize them and like sort of live in the trance of speaking. So even if they weren't supportive, they really couldn't stop me anyway, because I was always, memorizing stories and reciting them. And I think that that was the beginning of spoken word, listening to records, record players. Yeah, that's how long ago it was. Little 45 records that told you fairy tales and Disney stories, and reciting that. All of that is poetry. Listening to The Wizard of Oz, all of that just has hyperbole and imagery and creatures. So I think that that was my introduction to spoken word. So in answer to the question, I think my family knew that that's what I was going to be, an entertainer. Actually, a performer, and then I would probably say an entertainer as
Mm.
well, because I look at poetry. Yeah, I look at poetry as a way of entertaining and finding that poetry is theatrical, and it can be funny and it can be serious. And so I sort of look at poems from that perspective. But I write poems in order to perform. So I think that that is the vehicle for me. I don't write songs, I don't play the guitar, but I have my poems, and that's like a pocket full of stories, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. What tell me, when did the kind of poetry bug when did that actually hit you though? Did it find you, or did you find it, was it in childhood, young adulthood? When did you actually kind of lift it up and take it?
That's a good question. Thanks, Amanda. I found poetry after college,
Mm.
quite truthfully. You were looking at the 1990s, and the term multiculturalism, which is, I think, such a 90s dated word, that was the beginning of multiculturalism. So, by that, I mean, if you walked into a bookstore, you would see Asian and American anthologies, um, Latinx anthologies, African American anthologies, erotic Asian anthologies. And so, in the very beginning of the 90s, as a poet, there was a space for me. And I remember one of the books I was anthologizing is an Asian American erotica anthology called On a Bed of Rice. Can you believe that title, On a Bed of Rice? That would not float today, On a Bed of Rice. And there was like a half naked Asian woman, and you could see like a nipple outline. And I'm just like, On a Bed of Rice, really? Hmm. Back then in the 90s, things weren't as triggering.
Yeah,
And we were just happy to have a book. I was happy to be in a book, right? I'm just happy to be seen or heard as Filipinos because we're not on the mainstream. And so, going back to being a child of immigrant, you have parents that are like, you have to make succeed, you have to do this, stay in school. You're going to be like a doctor or a lawyer or something like that, right? It's not going to be like, yes, and you're going to be a poet, Reggie. So yeah, going back to that, I think people are afraid of poetry, and certainly in the Philippines, poetry is such a antiquated oral tradition.
mm,
It's more like
mm,
debate and rhythmic skills called baliktasan. So that's that's the kind of oral performance. But I don't even think my parents knew any of that anyway, or even what poetry was, or even if they even read books, right? Or even if they read a newspaper, right? My parents were busy trying to work, and I have a mom who's a Filipino nurse and dad who's from the Navy. So, um, but certainly getting my experience out there is probably the reason why I am a poet. I
for
think to be
sure.
seen and heard, because being the child of immigrants, you're always invisible in the background, and you're having to translate, and you live in two worlds. You're never fully Filipino, you're never fully American, you're only Filipino American.
Yes,
It's you could look at that as a power, or you could look at that as being an outcast. And sometimes there's a power in being the outsider, and there's a power by being able to move and to float back and forth sometimes between worlds.
absolutely. No, I completely agree with you. The idea of the in between generation almost. I feel like I remember there was some research I did. It's like called Generation 1.5. You're
Mm,
not quite fully American, but you're also not quite from your motherland, right? So you being Filipino American, you're kind of a dual reality that you've been living in. Where at
right.
home you're probably one way, then outside you act a different way, but you still have those kind of thoughts. How much, like you said, like that, you feel like that's a superpower for your writing, especially? Could you maybe expand more on that?
It's a superpower because you are taking your experience and you're sending it out and really depicting what that other world is like,
Mm,
and you're reporting on those stories, and it's not the same old Little House on the Prairie shit. that you're going to be hearing or that you've heard all the time. So I think that it is a superpower, and it's also that I'm sure child of immigrants might even share my stories in that um, you're also disconnected from your parents' homelands,
Yes.
and you're disconnected culturally and sometimes through the language. So there is that disconnect, and it's also that the ancestors that you have, we don't even have the like some of us do not have the privilege of ancestry,
Yeah.
right? And then people could say, well, I'm related to so and so, and I can't really say that I'm related to Queen Elizabeth, right? But I'm like, well, I'm uh, descended from indigenous farm workers, right? Like, who is that, right? So you really do feel disconnected, not just from um, that outside American world,
Hmm.
other world. You're also disconnected from lineage and history. And so there is a disconnect. And so I think your whole life you're just trying to connect. And so poetry becomes this vital vehicle in order to connect with other people.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now kind of we've heard a little bit about your just background, your but now let's kind of dive into your illustrious career. I want to ask you, I'm gonna make you blush a little bit, but you're described as a spoken word pioneer. I mean, those are such fighting words. Those are such heavy words, the gravity of being able having that said about you. I mean, what is it meant to you? I mean, just being given this title, as people describe you as a pioneer in your field.
Wow. Thank you for that question. Being a pioneer means that I was at the very beginning of the movement, which is the poetry slam. So my first time reading around at the Nuyorican Poets Cafe was around 1993.
Mhm.
And so at that point, the poetry slam, which is an American art form, it's the competitive art of performance poetry. A poet reads a poem without costume music or props. And you get scored 0 to 10 like the Olympics.
Yeah.
So in this form, you're creating 3 minute texts, poetic texts, monologue stories within 3 minutes. And you're really trying to captivate an audience with just words and your voice and your physicality and your stage presence. So for me, that was the art form that I became someone who defined what that would be. And so when I was reading at the Nuyorican Poets Cafe, there were a few people who memorized their poems, but I did not have a literary background. So when I was performing my poems, I would memorize the poems and I would look at them as, little short monologues that you would audition for as an actor or even a Broadway showstopper without music. So when I started to perform, I was the first openly queer and Filipino poet who really succeeded in the form. And so I later won the Nuyorican Poets Cafe Grand Slam champion. And at that point, MTV they were recording 30-minute poetry videos, and I was able to have that recorded. And then I was on tour with Lollapalooza, with the Beastie Boys and Smashing Pumpkins and George Clinton. So I was thrown into a spotlight, not knowing what this world was, of what spoken word poetry, performance poetry, slam poetry was. But I was actually doing it, and I was succeeding in that art form. So I just think it's important because spoken word poetry is ephemeral. And when I was performing, there was no YouTube at the time.
Mm.
And so there was no way to record footage from 1993 in the way that you have it. And if you don't put yourself out there, um, every every young 20-year-old is going to say they invented it, they started it.
Yes.
So I do think it's important for especially the slam poets in the 90s to really archive and to remember where this all evolved and where this came from. And it's hard to say whether slam poetry is going to have its own literary art name. Like you have Beats, the Beats. And then I remember when I was, reading at the Nuyorican Poets Cafe, New York Magazine said the Beats are back. And I think all of us that were performing at the time just really hated the comparison. Like, we are not the Beats. We're not white people in a cafe with Bob Dylan. It's just not that. And slam poets, like beat poetry, would be really long and elongated, and slam poets are very terse, and it's only 3 minutes. So a lot of differences, but really, they should say that indigenous people are back, or people of color are back, or queer people are back, because the people who succeeded in the poetry slam were BIPOC poets and queer poets, because they were speaking a kind of truth that is not heard. And to be openly queer in the 90s was a heroic, courageous act, because there were a lot of poets who were closeted. And so to say that you're openly queer back then was a huge deal.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm so curious. I mean, being able to spread the word, like you said, as openly queer, that in itself is such an act of bravery, especially at that time period. But I also kind of want to dig into what does that even feel like? How old were you when kind of that MTV, the really things started going into a whirlwind for your career? How old were you? I mean, and at that point, these things are all happening at once. I mean,
Right.
where's your mind even at? Can you even process fully what was going on?
I could not process what the fuck was going on. I had no idea. Because it was just, I read a poem and then I get a standing ovation and then I win something and then I'm going on tour, and I'm just not used to that. And like I knew that after that I'd have to get better as a writer.
Mm.
I knew that I had to back it up, right? And I had to develop, I had to learn, and I had to be a better writer. But it did open the doors for me to also do theater work and performance work and solo shows at the same time. So I really developed a lot during that time, and I I was, it was right after college, and it came at a good time because I just wanted to give up as an actor because I wasn't Asian enough, or the type of, I have the look that was not quite what casting directors were thinking of for Asian, let alone there were no Filipino parts. So having poetry there meant that I had artistic control, and I wasn't dependent upon a casting director to
Yeah.
cast me to do something. So
No, absolutely. Speak a little bit more on that, how kind of, especially as a writer, as a poet, like you said, you weren't dependent on that casting agent. You were kind of the captain of your own ship in a lot of ways.
mhm.
How important do you think that is as a poet? A lot of people question getting with a publisher. Obviously, you've gone such a myriad of ways with media, like MTV going on tour with people, Beastie Boys performing with, Lupe Fiasco, kind of those very unique collaborations. What do you think as a poet? What is your advice to other people that listen to this show? Kind of, casting their net wide, but also still remaining in control of where their art lies. What is your opinion on that?
Yeah, that is a great question, because nobody is going to make you a poet.
Mm.
You make yourself a poet. Right. And what I would say to young poets who are starting is that if you're a poet, everyone should know that you're a poet. Yeah, everyone in your building should know. Hi, I'm Reggie. I'm your neighbor. I'm a poet. I'm doing a reading down here.
Yeah.
I think if you are a poet, start your own reading series. You can start your own online publication. You could start your own podcast or series. I think things have changed. You can be a poet on Instagram. Like that's just it, right? And I want to go back because I've been thinking, Amanda, about the term street poetry
Mm,
and street poets because it also seems like a dated title, but street poetry and it's now getting another resurgence. And if you're looking up street poetry, that is like people in Australia putting stickers of poems on the street.
yeah.
It could also mean people on the street reading poems, selling books on the street. Um, so, what does that really mean? I think street poetry is a way of how do you get yourself out there? And
Yes.
I think, street poetry might be with like, I'm a social media poet.
Mm,
And I don't think that makes you any less of a poet. I think that people who publish poetry actively are going to look at the content or the craft or the skill of the poem and say, this is not quite there. But it doesn't really matter because um, poetry has no rules.
yeah.
And so, people think that you have to get an MFA and to be a poet, but the MFA doesn't make you a poet.
Yeah.
MFA just means that you sat around a table, um, cutting up and reading everyone else's poems, and you connected with a few mentors who are, who are hopefully positive of your work. I also know a lot of teachers who just want to destroy students. And it's as an educator, because I am an educator also, I really don't believe in destroying people or making people feel bad. Like if you're going to mentor or teach poetry, people should leave your class, your workshop, wanting to write poetry, not feeling
Yes.
bad. If you take a singing class, you should leave singing and singing high notes properly, right? So I think that's something that I learned later in life is that everyone has a poem. And I also have this passion and gift for making sure that people can write their poem and share it. And I think that it goes back to my childhood immigrant roots
Mm,
because things were never said. And I want truth in a space. When I do poetry, it should be truth in a space and people listening and people dreaming together when they listen to a poem
yeah.
that there's a dreaming that happens.
Absolutely. No, that's beautiful. A dreaming that happens when people listen to poetry. Absolutely. And again, I kind of want to reckon back to this idea, the gravity of the effect that you've had as you've published what more than 30 anthologies. Again, you've sort of pioneer, right, a trailblazer, won multiple grand slams. What kind of looking back from your career from where it started in poetry to where it is now, I mean, did you ever imagine that you'd be at this breadth of really just absolutely top of your class, right? One of the best in your field. Did you ever imagine that this would be your trajectory as a poet?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. You have no idea where poetry is going to take you.
Mm.
And that's sort of the beauty of being a poet. Like the next thing in the email, you might get a text from Amanda. You can say, "Hey, will you do this podcast, or will you be able to do this?" So, like, yeah, you don't know who you're going to connect with, right? And
Yeah.
you have no idea. I think as a poet, you write a poem, so it gets published, people will read it, or they'll see your performance, and you don't know who's reading it.
Yes.
No, it's almost like putting a message in a bottle, throwing it into the ocean, and you have no idea who's
Yeah.
read, who is teaching your poem. And I think uh, in everything that you're saying, being the top of a genre or a field is not really what I'm most proud about. I think I'm most proud about uh, doing it since doing it for at least 31 years,
Mm,
right? And sticking to something for 31 years and trying to get better at it, and discovering more. And I think I'm more proud of being an active poet and growing
yeah.
more than the title. I think that's to be able to make discoveries and to keep writing poems for
Yeah.
30 years, writing and performing poems for 31 years actively. I think uh, I think that for anyone, that's a commitment. And I know that there are poets who may not have been as published enough or may not have received the kind of accolades I have, but anyone who sticks with something for so long, um, is just it deserves, like, living along for 30 years doing poetry and making your money off of it.
Yeah.
Even that, like, it's the business that finds you. And I
Yeah.
wanted to give up. And there are times where I'm like, well, I am not going to pay the rent. So I'm going to I'm going to apply to work at this bakery, right?
Mm,
And so I come close to applying and something else happens and I'm able to survive. So, um, yeah, thank you for asking. And I'm just blessed and humble that as poets, you got to stay healthy and live long,
yeah.
right? Live long, stay healthy, exercise, eat your vegetables,
Yes.
cut the
Yes, sir.
sugar.
Yes, yes, sir. Absolutely. It's that idea. Like, I love what you said. It's not even the culmination of your achievement that's meant the most. It's the climb and it's the person you became as you've climbed to reach those goals. And it's the constant always knowing I just love to grow and I'm gonna continue to grow in every aspect. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you a little secret because I grew up Catholic and I really thought I might be a priest.
Oh,
Um,
really?
And so, I was like, when I was in fifth grade, it was all Catholic schools. So, like, I was into Catholicism. I don't practice it actively as much now, but I say that because I think that it is religion, it is spirituality, it is shamanistic, and
Mhm.
you are giving lights, you are giving hope, you are trying to tell people you're giving them what it is to live in the human condition, and you're trying to give people a way to exist
Yes.
or a way to hang on or a way to inspire or to see what is happening right now because there's so much unprecedented shit that happens. So poets name it and that they speak it and that they release this prayer or this spell. Poetry is a spell, and so to me, that's another component, and another component about why I won't stop being a poet because it is a daily practice. You have to look at the world on a daily basis and make continual observations, remembering and recording and processing all of that and making connections. So, really, the poem is a bridge to the world and to people. And as a child of immigrants, um, we're always trying to find a bridge.
Mm,
We are almost bridgeless, and we are building our own bridges. I'm starting an Asian mentorship, a poet program in Washington D.C. with an organization, Day Eight, and the project is called Heart of My Home, Home That I Built. I'm paraphrasing, but in terms of doing a portfolio with Asian American poets in DC, Home That I Built, I feel like Amanda, you and I, we've had to build our homes, right? And
mm,
build what home means and
mm.
broaden that. Um, so so that's important.
Absolutely. No, that idea of home and what that means to so many different people. Now, thank you so much for sharing that, Reggie. And just speaking of, poetry and building and creating new connections, Reggie is featured on the new show streaming on the Archaeology Channel's new streaming service, Heritage, called The Poet Speaks with Amanda Eke. So yours truly. Reggie, you were in the episode Spoken Word in the Village. By the time folks hear this podcast, the episode will be streaming everywhere.
Yes, yes.
Tell us a little bit about your experience being on The Poet Speaks with Amanda Eke. Tell us a little bit about the day for filming and the amazing work that you did in the poem.
Well, it was a phenomenal experience, and I want to say it's great to get television credits, and it's rare, and it's great to be archived, especially post pandemic or in this time frame. Not that the pandemic and not that COVID's over, but to be able to enter and to film, to go back to my roots in New York City and to be at Poet's House and to be reconnected in person. All of my work was virtual. It was so energizing to perform there and also to meet Thomas Vocalaro, who is also recording in this episode with the Village, to really just reflect also. What the influence and the multiplicity of voices that informed my work was just also emotional, and it was just an exciting day, and it was really really hot, but not as hot as like recording on a a platform.
Yeah.
So thank you. I'm glad that we were like little breeze,
Yeah.
little bit of sun, little bit of tree shade.
Yeah.
um, so it was a jubilation, and we got it done. It was snappy. We got it. We moved it.
Yeah, we did that. Yeah, folks, check it out. Reggie is featured on the Spoken Word in the Village episode. We're looking at oral traditions and how the village, Greenwich Village, has influenced a lot of New York poets. So he performs a very, very powerful piece and has some very powerful words to say for that episode for The Poet Speaks with Amanda Eke, streaming on the Archaeology Channel's new streaming service, Heritage. Links will be down below. So big thank you to Reggie for not only being on the podcast, but also being on the TV show. So we are so excited, and you did such a phenomenal job.
Oh, Amanda, I gotta plug my book. It's called
Yes.
Rabbit in Search of a Rolex
Ooh.
by Day 8. So if you look it up online on Day 8 website, you can buy the book and check it out.
A Rabbit in Search of a Rolex. I'm wondering, where does that title come from? That is a pretty specific title.
It's a line from one of the poems, and the book is just a series of meditations. It is a spiritual meditation, and I was thinking of the word hammock
Mm.
and what it feels like to be in a hammock, and I would just close my eyes and I would like drink wine, have an edible, and the words just came out. I have fallen in the universe's hammock. I listen to the trees walk and skip around me. I am the white rabbit in search of a Rolex. I feel the kindness of dice roll around my knees. So, those words were the spiritual meditation. That was the truth. The journey, the magic, the way that you can fall into the universe and open yourself up. So, and that's a rabbit in search of a Rolex. I use that with my students. A robot in search of a heart, a cucumber in search of yogurt, a pencil in search of a pad. Like you can just keep going with that. So
Yeah, absolutely beautiful. Reggie's, that will be the link down below, no matter where you're listening to this podcast. So everyone go check that out. That sounds amazing. And Reggie, last question for you. We ask every poet on the Poet Speaks podcast. Regie Cabico, why do you need to get your words out?
I gotta get my words out because I need to connect. I need to connect, and I've grown up feeling disconnected, and I grew up in a dysfunctional place, and the only way to heal from trauma is to connect by being yourself. And I think it's simple. And I hope I speak my words because I hope that someone listening will also share their story and their words.
Absolutely. All right. He needs to connect everyone. All right, Regie, we appreciate you being a guest. Now, our final question before we let you go. Please tell the folks what's next for you in 2024, any events, and then tell us where can we find you, socials, website, and all that good stuff.
Oh, thank you. Check out A Gathering of the Tribes. It is an organization where I'm executive director. We do a lot of poetry literary programs. The roots are originally in the village. And please check that out. And you will see what I'm doing. I'm working, now that I'm working more in New York, I'm looking to do
Mm.
my theater performance. I hope to be connected with the New York Neo Futurists again, and I look for my next book. It took me about 30 years to do this book. It's not going to take another 30 years for my next one. So very soon, I hope to have a longer, full length book.
Absolutely. Where can we find you for socials, website, all that good stuff?
Yeah, Instagram Regie Guy. That's RegieGuy, and then Regie Cabico on Facebook. There are other Regie Cabicos. Look for the cute one.
There we go, y'all. Look for the cute one. Yep, it's here. Yep, look for the cute one, please. All right, Regie, thank you so much for being a guest on the Poet Speak podcast. Everyone, Regie's links will be down below in the description box, no matter what platform you're listening to this podcast on. Look for the links in the description box below. All right, Regie, thank you so much for being a guest today on the Poet Speaks podcast.
Thank you, Amanda.
Absolutely. All right. And again, everyone, check out all Regie's amazing work. Check out the Poet Speaks podcast, no matter where you listen to podcasts. All right. Bye-bye, everyone.